In just 1 month, this place can claim 9 lives. The number of people who lost fingers to frostbite, suffered fractures, or trauma never publicly disclosed. Any other location with these stats would have been shut down long ago and someone would be facing arrest. But Everest seems to have a license to kill, including mountain climbing police officers. Apparently. Still, I can't pin all these deaths on the mountain. Take this guy. This is David Sharp, a skilled climber known for his rapid acclimatization and natural talent for scaling peaks. He'd already tackled multiple 8000ers, attempted Everest twice before, and okay, no need to tease it. He died on his 3rd try in 2006. But the way he died, that's what gives me chills. So, what really kills people on Everest? And why does the world keep looking the other way? To reach that desirable peak, 8,848 m, you first need to pick a route. Everest isn't the neighborhood hill you climbed with grandpa as a kid. You don't just go up from the bottom or pitch your tent wherever you please. 98% of climbers in every commercial guide choose either the North Pole route or the South Pole route. The other 2% mostly don't make it back. So, if someone you know says, "I'm climbing Everest," note 2 things. First, they just spent nearly $60,000 on the trip. And second, they're going via the South Pole. This is the mainstream route located on the pole side. The base camp here sits at an altitude of over 5,300 m. It's basically a long-term pit stop for acclimatization. Climbers spend weeks, sometimes even months, letting their bodies adjust to the thinner air and lower pressure, and they do it in near luxury conditions. But don't be too jealous. People die even here, like these 2 tourists who overestimated their limits. See, so-called altitude sickness may strike at 8,000 m or 5 or even 2. It's all about oxygen. The higher you go, the less of it there is. Symptoms range from dizziness to cerebral edema and death. But that's not the only threat the base camp hides. In 2015, an earthquake in the region triggered a series of deadly avalanches on Everest. The largest one hit the base camp directly. That day, 19 climbers were killed and around 40 were injured. And yet, this camp is still considered one of the safest spots on the whole route. Next up, total hell. And then the road to Camp 1, perched just above 6,000, and Camp 2 is farther up. But what's that? You're curious about the hell part? Fine. It's the Khumbu Icefall, the most dangerous stretch on the south route, maybe on all of Everest. It's exactly why many climbers, including David Sharp, opt for alternative paths. It's a massive river of ice that actually moves down the slope at a speed of around 1 meter per day. In the process, it triggers avalanches, destroys ropes and ladders, and opens up crevasses as deep as 100 m and as wide as 15. And guess who pays the price most often? Sherpas, the local guides. In April 2014, a group of Sherpas was fixing safety ropes along the Khumbu Icefall when a giant chunk of ice, a serac about 35 m thick and weighing over 14,000 tons, broke off. It would later be called an ice avalanche. 16 people were buried alive beneath the broken ice and snow. In 2023, tragedy struck again, killing 3 Sherpas. So far, it does look like Everest is the one to blame for all these deaths, especially since the next section only gets worse. From Camp 1, it's just about 3 kilometers to Camp 2. What could possibly go wrong, right? Well, for starters, heat. Up here, temperatures can reach nearly 40 degrees Celsius. Sunlight is barely filtered by the thin atmosphere, and snow reflects it perfectly. So perfectly that you can go blind without goggles, and that's a death sentence because the trail is riddled with crevasses. Some are visible if you can still see. That is, others lie just beneath the snow waiting for a careless step. And then it gets worse. Next comes about 2 and 12 kilometers straight up an icy wall at a slope of 40 to 50 degrees. Slipping here means death. Climbers must stay clipped to a safety rope at all times. You can't walk on smooth ice without crampons, those metal spikes on your boots. And to use them properly, you need to kick tiny footholds into the ice with every step over and over again for 3 to 6 hours of climbing. And after that, even worse, Camp 3 is the last place from where you can be evacuated by helicopter. Above this point, they can't fly because the air is too thin. And it's so thin that on your way to Camp 4, you'll already be pulling out your oxygen tanks, and you won't be stashing them anytime soon. This camp sits in the so-called death zone, where you don't live long without supplemental oxygen, or even with it. Climbers spend no more than 2 days here. Then comes the final push. It starts at night and takes anywhere from 9 to 20 hours, or forever if you're out of luck. First, a steep climb to the so-called balcony, followed by an even steeper ascent to the south summit. But that's just a tease. The real summit is still about an hour and a half farther along a razor-edge ridge where the path narrows down to just 1 m wide. And finally, you're standing on top of the world. One moment of glory, a few photos, and then what? You guessed it. Then it gets even worse. In May 2024, British climber Daniel Peterson and Nepali climber Pang Tenji Sherpa were descending from the summit. They had to weave around a line of climbers who were still going up, all clipped to the same safety rope. Everyone was unclipping and reclipping. It collapsed with 4 climbers on it. They plummeted down the slope. 2 of them were clipped into the rope that saved their lives. The bodies of Peterson and Tenji were never found. Of the 342 climbers who've lost their lives on Everest, over a third died during the descent. It's officially the most dangerous part of the climb on both the south and north routes. By the way, David Sharp chose a northeast ridge route for all 3 of his Everest attempts. That path runs through Chinese territory. Why? First, like I said earlier, no Khumbu icefall. And second, there are far fewer people, and you can actually drive to the base camp. But that's where the perks end. The winds are stronger, the temperatures colder, the terrain more challenging, and worst of all, there's no helicopter rescue. Plus, your acclimatization takes place at the advanced base camp located at nearly 6,500 m on the south route. That elevation marks Camp 2 of 4. The next 3 camps are in even harsher conditions, and the final push involves 3 rocky steps, some nearly vertical. But if anyone was ready for that kind of climb, it was David Sharp. He had already conquered Cho Oyu, another 8,000 m peak in 2002, and came close to climbing Gushabroom, too. He also made multiple attempts to summit Everest from the north side. He knew exactly what he was getting into. So, no, Everest didn't kill this guy. The question is, what did, or rather, who? Imagine this. You paid $60,000, spent weeks living at insane altitudes, slowly suffocating from lack of oxygen. You spent hours scaling frozen cliffs, maybe even lost a few toes to frostbite. And on the very day you're supposed to summit, someone tells you to turn back just a couple kilometers from the top. So what if you're trailing behind, low on oxygen, your legs failing from the cold? You have to keep going. And that right there is why I sometimes think that the people who try to conquer 8,000-meter peaks are just, how do I put this nicely, completely out of their freaking minds. And often it's that very insanity, not the mountain, that gets them killed. In 2021, for example, the death season opened with a climber who died from sheer exhaustion. Swiss climber Abdul Wera had reached the summit. But on the way down, he simply didn't have the strength to make it to safety. 2 Sherpas were sent to help, bringing extra oxygen and food. But it wasn't enough. His frozen body was later found near the south summit. How is that even possible, you ask? It's not. If you work 8 to 5 and watch my videos afterward with a bucket of chicken nuggets, even if you ran marathons and consumed only salad, your body would probably never reach that level of exhaustion. That's because you live your best life at around 300 to 500 m above sea level. But if I dropped you, say at 6,500, you wouldn't even finish this video. Even after acclimatization, your body never fully adjusts to the low oxygen. No matter how much you rest, you won't fully recover. And if I dropped you at 8,000, right into the death zone, you'd have to give up nuggets altogether. Up there, the body enters survival mode. Everything slows down, including digestion. But you won't last long in that mode. The dying process has already started. Now imagine spending a day or 2 in that state, and then being expected to summit. That's why climbers start their final push already exhausted. And figuring out whether you will have the strength to get back down is nearly impossible. David Sharp, though, knew how to pace himself. He'd already turned back twice just before the summit, losing only a few toes. But exhaustion isn't the only underestimated threat up there. In 2006, Australian climber Lincoln Hall. So, what did he do? Wrong guess. Let me explain. Lincoln was a seasoned climber who had summited multiple 7 and 8,000As and finally added Everest to his list. But while descending from the summit, he'd only dropped 150 m in altitude before everything went wrong. He mentally snapped, and the Sherpas trying to help him down ran out of oxygen and were forced to leave him. That same evening, his family was informed that Lincoln had died. But the next morning, another climbing group found Lincoln's body. Also, they thought, because a corpse was sitting upright near the second step, suit unzipped to the waist, trying to change shirts. Even more insane, Lincoln greeted the team with the words, "I imagine you're surprised to see me here." Well, surprise doesn't even begin to cover it. He'd spent over 12 hours in freezing cold without oxygen, water, gear, or even a clear mind, which may have actually saved him. Imagine realizing the hopelessness of your predicament like this. What Lincoln had developed was high-altitude cerebral edema, one of the deadliest forms of altitude sickness. It usually kills within 48 hours, often sooner. Symptoms include disorientation, unconsciousness, loss of coordination. Basically, the worst possible thing to happen to a climber in the death zone. Luckily, the group that found Lincoln abandoned their summit attempt, and along with 12 Sherpas sent from base camp helped bring him back down to safety. This curious story took place just weeks after David Sharp's death. It's believed he suffered from altitude sickness near the end as well, but that's not what killed him. In 2012, just 250 m from Camp 4, the body of 33-year-old Canadian climber Shreya Shaklorfine was found. She had died on the descent. Yet, her name doesn't appear on the list of that year's Everest summiters. So something must have stopped her from reaching the top. But what? Friends say summiting Everest was her life's dream. Look at what the company she hired promised. You'll do an 18-day trek to base camp, and once you're there, we'll teach you how to use ladders and everything like that. Oh, just the minor things, like survival skills. Shreya Shaklorfine paid around $100,000 for her dream, and not a single person who took her money stopped to say, hey, maybe climbing Everest with zero experience is a lethal idea. And because of money, more people have been hurt on this mountain than you might imagine. Some tried to cut costs on equipment and almost lose their lives. Some, like the company that led Shreya, are eager to profit and ignore red flags, and some just want to get their money's worth by reaching the summit, no matter the risk to themselves or others. Okay, it's time I told you exactly how David Sharp died. In early May 2006, Sharp arrived at the advanced base camp on the North Route. After 5 days of acclimatization, he began his climb. His rare ability to tolerate extreme altitudes worked in his favor. And by the evening of May 13th, having waited for a weather window at the highest camp, he launched his summit push. To this day, no one knows whether he reached the top or turned back just before it. The last point where he was seen by a group was the third step. They noticed that between 11 a.m. and 12 p.m. Sharp had only moved about 90 m. He was then seen by a few Turkish groups heading to the summit. He was sitting inside the infamous Green Boots Cave, a shallow rock shelter named after a climber who had died there in 1996. His body with its bright green boots became a grim altitude marker at 8,500 m. That's all you really need to know about Everest culture. The Turkish team saw Sharp barely conscious. 2 climbers tried to help him, offering water and oxygen, but their own tanks were nearly empty. They had to descend. The next group, though, they might have saved him, but didn't. Among them was a famous double amputee climber Mark Inglis, who spotted Sharp slumped in the cave motionless, hands resting on his knees. He was visibly frostbitten and oxygen-deprived. But unlike the earlier group, this one was just starting their climb, fresh and with full oxygen tanks. Yet they left him because of Sharp's critical state and their expedition's priorities. What priorities, you might ask? Well, this group was filming a documentary for Discovery Channel chronicling Inglis's journey. That same day, he became the first double amputee to summit Everest. But saving Sharp, that wasn't on the checklist. So, they left him there to die in the cave. Before his expedition, David told his mother not to worry because on Everest, you are never on your own. There are climbers everywhere. On May 15th, according to various accounts, between 18 and 40 people passed right by him. Wow, that would have been the perfect dramatic note to end this video on. Everyone on Everest is a selfish monster who lets people die for glory. But I wouldn't be myself if I didn't tell you the final truth, which is somehow even worse. Because there's another side to this madness that I haven't shown you yet. Here you see snowboarder Marco Safridi riding a bar down. Yes, you guessed it, Everest. In 2001, 22-year-old Marco climbed Everest with a couple of Sherpas to live out his dream. But his dream, the Hornbeam Couloir, didn't have enough snow to ride. So he chose a different slope, the Northern Couloir. But let's be real, snowboarding down the Northern Couloir is absolute madness. Probably because Marco came back the next year to do it properly real snowboard style down Hornbeam. And hey, who among us wouldn't do the same? This time, though, things didn't go as planned. The climb to the summit took him 13 hours, and he told the Sherpas he was exhausted. Still, despite worsening weather, he dropped into the Hornbeam Couloir and began the descent. No one ever saw him again. Not even his body was found. So why would anyone do this? There's only one answer. Just climbing the mountain isn't enough anymore. You have to up the dose. Remember how I said people kept passing by David Sharp? Ever wonder where his group was? Trick question. He didn't have one. Sharp climbed Everest solo. And you know what else? He didn't have oxygen. He only brought 2 emergency tanks just in case. But as you remember, it didn't help. He wanted to do it raw. No Sherpas, no team, no 2. And no, he wasn't insane. It had been done before. Reinhold Messner in 1980 solo climbed Everest with no oxygen tanks, blazing a new route through the Northern Couloir. So Sharp knew it was possible. And he knew that his life was his responsibility because up in the death zone, rescuing someone isn't just risky, it's suicidal. Rescues like that are incredibly rare. So, no, David Sharp didn't expect anyone to save him. He knew the risks, but he took them anyway, and that's what scares me most. Okay, one last fact for you. David Sharp's body is still on Everest along with around 200 others. Bringing them down from that altitude is nearly impossible. David even had a burial of sorts. 2 Sherpas moved his body from Green Boots Cave to a nearby rock face and pushed it down the slope. Why not leave him in the cave like the original Green Boots dude? Maybe to avoid renaming it. What do you think?